this session on a session of faculty development program on innovating teaching and research methods in law. I would like to welcome the guest speaker, Professor Dr. Salim Shamsher in this session. I would also like to welcome our honorable guest, Vice Chancellor Sir, Professor Dr. Tabrez Ahmed, the faculty colleagues and participants. Before we go ahead, a brief introduction of the honorable guest. Professor Dr. Salim Shamsher has a total 22 years of experience in teaching, training, and industry. He is presently serving as the Associate Dean of SVKM Narsi Monji Institute of Management Studies, Navi Mumbai. Some of his major achievements include: he served earlier as Professor and Dean, School of Finance and Commerce, and Officiating Dean, School of Lifelong Learning at Galgotias University. He has chaired Finance Area and Center for Faculty Development in Teaching and Research at Flame University, Pune. Head of Department, Finance and Accounting Area at STES, Pune. He has handled a consulting assignment in internal audit at Kinetic Engineering Limited, Pune, obtained a merit rank in the PGDFM program of Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Pune, and also won subsequently Director's Special Prize at Symbiosis International University Annual Convocation 2001. He obtained a Certified Management Accountant qualification and a Certificate in Strategy and Competitive Analysis qualification from Institute of Management Accountants, United States of America. Certified as a trainer from Dale Carnegie, India, and handled training assignments for international clients in the various corners of the world. He has also served as District Director Professional Services, PDD, for Rotary International District 3130, Pune, Panvel, from 2000 to 2001. Dr. Salim Shamsher has also been the member of various selection panels, member of selection panel for selection of MBA students at Symbiosis International University, Pune. He has also chaired a selection panel of deans and associate deans for selection of PhD aspirants in the area of social sciences at Galgotias University, Delhi, NCR. Welcome to School of Law, GDGU University, sir. Now, I would like to call upon the learned guests to address this session. Over to Professor Dr. Salim Shamsher.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tariq. And it is, it always feels embarrassing listening about you all again. And so many times we just keep on listening about ourselves, but that's very nice. So thank you very much for introducing me. And thank you, Dr. Azim, Dr. Tabrez, for having invited me for this FDP. And it is indeed my pleasure to address this audience at Goenka University. Thank you, Goenka University, for extending this invitation. Having said that, let me just share the PowerPoint and then we can begin. So I'm using this particular software for the first time because we work a lot on Teams. So just give me some time so I try to figure out that what I'm supposed to be doing. But I think I will crack it. Okay. No. Oh. How do I? How do I?
You can share. There is one raise hand icon at the bottom, and just right hand to that. There is slide share option.
That is what I'm doing, but I'm just sharing my own this thing. Okay, just give me 1 minute.
Yeah.
Sir, you have to open your PPT. Okay. Then in that arrow sign, if you click it, you have the option to present particular window. So there you have to choose that particular window.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I have to choose a window. Okay, I think I got that. Yeah. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
It's coming, sir.
Yes, sir. It's visible now.
Right. Great. Am I also visible to you all, and everything is okay?
Yes, sir. You are visible.
Okay. Great. Good. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, lovely, great. Okay, so if I'm visible, I can start speaking, and I'm audible. Great then. So good afternoon to all of you, and let us begin this talk. So I'm going to speak mainly on case study, and I'm going to speak to you all on the research perspective of that. Okay, that's what I'm going to kind of address, and I'm just trying to see. Okay. Okay. So let us begin. Right. So the structure of my presentation goes as follows. Firstly, I'll be kind of talking a little bit. I'll be introducing the topic to you. And then we will speak about the nature of social sciences, because when I talk of law, when I talk of management, I club all that into a social science. And all this is very much connected. So we will talk about that. Then, generally when I look at case studies, mainly I talk of looking at case studies from three perspectives. I talk of looking at case study as a tool for research. I talk of looking at case studies as a tool for teaching. And I also look at case studies as a tool for connecting research and teaching, right? But mainly today we are going to speak about using case study as a tool for research. So that is going to be my focus. I'll not speak about teaching, but I may a little bit speak about how do you connect research and teaching together by using case studies. So we'll talk about that also. And so let's begin. So just have a read at the slide, please. Have a read at the slide. So generally, whenever we talk of case studies, the first major differentiator is that case study is actually an application-based method, right? So whenever we teach using various methods, I think there's the lecture method, and there's the group discussion method, and there are multiple methods of teaching and learning. But case study is one method which is very much application-based, wherein you are actually teaching students on how to learn by doing, because they actually do it, and by doing that they learn, right? So this whole strategy of case study is based on learning by doing. And therefore, whenever we are using case studies in research also, we have to remember that case study is something which is action based, wherein something is happening, something has to be investigated, something has to be looked at, something has to be examined, something has to be explored, right? So it is very action based, unlike other methods of research which are not very action based, right? So that is where case study is different from other methods. That's one. The other major aspect of case studies is, we talk about it as something which is interdisciplinary and which is very dynamic. Now, let me take some examples, and you will agree with me that you all are professors of law, and I'm a professor of management, but still I can speak law. And I can tell you that whenever you talk of law or you talk of any cases of law, you will agree with me that under that, there is an underlying discipline. There is an underlying social science discipline. I'll take an example. Let's say you talk of laws relating to taxation. Or let's say you talk of the Companies Act. Now, if you're talking of the Companies Act, the underlying subject is corporate law, which is related to business. If you're talking of taxation related laws, then the underlying subject is taxation, which is again coming from management. Let's say you talk of criminal laws. So there you won't believe that when you're trying to actually understand the behavior of a criminal, you are trying to look at subjects like sociology and psychology. Now just see that if you are if you are a practitioner of criminal laws, or you're trying to do research in the area of criminal this thing, then don't you agree with me that subjects like psychology and sociology would become very important for you? Because you will have to understand that why the crime has been created, what has led to the crime, what is the scenario surrounding the crime. So you are actually trying to investigate that whole phenomenon because of which the crime has occurred. So when you're doing that, when you're investigating that, when you're trying to explore that, what you are actually doing is you're using the case study method, right? So this is where the case study method comes in, and therefore you will agree that the subject of law is very interdisciplinary. It is actually connected with almost all the disciplines. You name it: management, commerce, social sciences, psychology, sociology, behavior, and therefore entrepreneurship studies, organizational behavior. And therefore it is very, very important that if you are talking of using case studies as a tool, it is not that you can confine yourself only to the subject of law. You will have to gain a holistic understanding of all the subjects, and then be in a position to try to connect the dots and then try to look at the big picture. Because when you're looking at the big picture, then only you will be in a position to understand that where your law and where your judgment is actually fitting in, and then only will you be in a position to write cases. That's the first thing. That's the first aspect, which is the interdisciplinary nature. The second aspect is also very critical, and which is the feature which is dynamic. These subjects are all dynamic in nature. If you look at the subject of law also, law is not a constant subject. Law is a subject which is continuously changing over a period of time. As these new and new judgments are produced by the court, you will agree with me that the earlier stand that you used to take is now changing, and you're now taking a newer stand, right? So these subjects are all evolving subjects. These subjects are not like constant subject, like a subject like history, which is constant. But these subjects, management, social sciences, law, these are all dynamic subjects. And because these subjects are all dynamic, when you're writing cases also, you have to write it from a very futuristic perspective. That what you don't try to talk about what has happened in the past, but actually you try to see that what is going to happen in the future. You look at events which are more contemporary in nature, rather than looking at events which are more historical in nature whenever you talk of the case study method, right? So remember these key points whenever you think of using the case study method as a method of research. One, case study method is based on doing. Second, case study method is actually interdisciplinary. So, you will have to be in a position to look at all the subjects together and try to connect the dots and then look at the bigger picture. And the third major feature is case study method can be used, when things are dynamic, when you're trying to look at future and then you're trying to predict things on the basis of that. Right? So these are the three critical points that you all should keep in mind at this point. If you have any questions in between, I don't know whether we will take questions at the end or whether you want to ask me questions in between. I'm okay with either. If you want to ask me questions in between also, I can answer. But if you want to ask me at the end also, I'm fine with that. The way it depends on you, the way you
we will take the question at the end of the session, sir.
Fair enough. We'll take questions at the end. Great. So this is the first major point that you all need to understand. Let's go ahead. Now, this is very important. Please read this very carefully. Take 2 minutes and read the slide. It has a lot of information. So let's go a little slowly. Very key points are covered in this. Have a look at it and read each point. Now let's go through each of them and try to understand that what exactly we are trying to talk about. So let's first define the term case. How would you define the term case? Let's talk about that. And let's talk more from the legal perspective. So generally, the term case, when we talk of the term case is used in various disciplines. The term case is used in law. The term case is used in management. The term case is also used in medicine. When you refer to patients also, you refer to them as cases. In law also, when you refer to the judgments and you talk in relation to a case. In management, we talk of business cases, right? So the term case is used across disciplines. But from a social legal perspective, if you really want to understand what is the case, it is not the term case which is stated in law. Like we say a law case, that is not the meaning of the term case study, right? The case study actually, it says very clearly, is different. It is a methodology. Case study is actually a methodology that is used to answer some questions. Now, what are the questions that we try to answer when we use the case study method? What could be the questions in research? Can anybody tell me what could be the questions in research which we try to explore? Can we keep it interactive? Tariq, Dr. Tariq, can we keep this interactive?
Yeah, sure, sir. We have to, better to keep it interactive. And I would like to call upon all the participants. Please interact with our guest speaker. Let's make it interactive.
Yeah, so that makes it more interesting. No? So anybody would like to tell me that what could be the research questions that generally we try to explore? You all have, most of you have done your PhD, right? Most of you would have done your PhD. So you tell me what could be the basic research questions which we try?
Please come up with the appropriate answers. I request everybody.
Yes, good afternoon. Please tell me.
It could be the various lessons that have been learned after the case has happened, and based on that, what could be the say good practices that could be imbibed, and therefore that could be one of the way of approaching a case study. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Any other people would like to interact? Then what could be the basic research questions which we try to explore? Not necessarily relating to a case. Anybody else would like to share some thoughts on that?
I think, sir.
Yes, Prof. Yes, Prof.
So the context, I think, is very relevant. At the point of time when a particular case or a particular direction was taken in a matter, what was the context in which that conclusion was arrived at, and what were the driving forces which led to that decision making? And then evaluating whether, in the context of the facts which exist today, whether that is an appropriate approach, or whether that approach needs to be tinkered and modified, taking into account what changes have happened,
Yeah, perfect. Great. Lovely. So done. So, but when I look at it from a very basic level, let's go from the very basics and then we'll slowly pick up. The various questions that I would ask in research would be either a how question, that how this thing has happened, or I would ask a question why this thing has happened, or I would ask a question what has happened, or I would ask a question how much has happened. I would ask a question what has happened, I would ask a question why it has happened, I would ask a question how it has happened, or I would ask a question how much it has happened. Basic research questions would either focus on either of these or all of these. Now, where does the case study method fit in? It is very clear, research is very clear on this. And a lot of research in this area has been done by, multiple researchers. And you can look at this, the study of yin and yin. Look at the study of yin and yin, where he has tried to use case studies in research. And he tells very clearly that case studies is only used to answer how and why. If you want to answer a research question which is based on why this thing has happened, or if you want to answer a research question based on how this thing has happened, I'll give an example. Let's say a crime has been committed. Let's say you're a criminal lawyer, right? A crime has been committed. Now, when a crime has been committed and you're trying to study why this crime was committed, under what consequences this crime was committed, or what was the behavior of the criminal because of which he committed this crime, when you're trying to explore the why, or you are trying to explore that how was this crime committed, or you are trying to explore how was this crime committed, when you're trying to explore the why and the how, that is when you use case studies. That is when you use case studies. But if you're trying to explore the question how many criminals committed this crime, How many criminals committed this crime? How many questions are not answered by case studies? There you have to use a different method, which is called survey. You would have heard of the term survey, no? The survey method. So survey method is used when you talk of answering questions relating to quantity. Case study method is used when you want to answer questions relating to quality. When you try to answer questions of how and why. So this is the first and the most important point that you all need to remember, that when you should use case studies, when you want to answer explanations, when you want to explore, when you want to explain something, that is when you use case studies, right? So be very clear on this. Then, yin and yin, as I told you, you can read a lot of literature which is given by yin and yin on using case studies and research. And then there is, one more definition which is very good, and which is the third point, which says that what is a case? It is a systematic inquiry into an event or a set of related events which aims to describe and explain the phenomenon of interest. So you're trying to explore the context, you're trying to explore the phenomenon, you're trying to explore the background. That is where case studies comes into picture, right? And the beautiful part of case studies is that case study is very much connected to real life. Cases are generally real scenarios. So this is something which has actually happened. So when you're using case study as a tool, your research actually becomes much more practical. It becomes much more pragmatic, because then you're doing your research based on something which has actually happened. And that is also one major benefit of using case studies. These are all real life scenarios. You could also have hypothetical cases. You could also create imaginary cases and then try to use that in research. But generally cases are mainly real life scenarios, right? And then in a very simple way, if you want to define what is a case, I would say it is a description of a situation that can have multiple meanings. So when you're trying to look at a certain phenomenon and you're trying to look at the phenomenon from various perspectives, and the beauty of case study is a case can have multiple answers. There is no one right answer. One lawyer looked at it from a perspective. The other lawyer looked at it from another perspective. Though the law doesn't change, see, try to understand, the law doesn't change. The way the law is interpreted changes. The way the law is interpreted changes, and that is where the case study method comes into picture, right? And as I told you, the situation could be real or hypothetical. So the cases are mainly real life cases, or they could be also imaginary scenarios based on, and a case is always supported by examples. Whenever you look at any case studies, look at any of the case repositories, you will see that a case always has a lot of exhibits attached to that. So these exhibits are actually information which you need to relate to the case and then try to bring the whole thing together, right? So cases have a lot of exhibits also, and examples are there within that case study, which actually try to explain to you that why this particular situation has happened, right? And the case then provides you information to take decisions. So if you're looking at it from business angle, then information to take decisions or arrive at conclusions. Or general, and now this point is very important, generalization. Now, can anybody tell me what is the meaning of the term generalization in research methodology? See, we are talking of research, no? We are talking of research, yes or no? So you all would have studied a subject called as research methodology. You all would have studied research methodology. Most of you are PhDs or PhD scholars. Tell me, what do you mean by generalization in research methodology? Did I ask you how to make an atom bomb? So what
Yes.
is, yes, you can go ahead and answer, whoever wants to speak.
Smriti, please go ahead.
What is generalization? Somebody was speaking. Somebody had raised the hand. Smriti, I think. Nobody? Generalization?
Hello, sir.
Yes. Please go.
Yeah. Hi, this is Mona.
Yes, Mona.
So, a generalization would be applying inductive reasoning, like taking few case-based scenario and from that specific sample, generalizing the concept. So, basically, inducing generalized principle from specific observations.
Fair enough. Great, Mona. That's true. Anybody else on generalization? Okay. Great. So what Mona said is absolutely correct. I would just add to what she said that the term generalization in research methodology means when you use multiple things, multiple ways of arriving at the same conclusion. So, in case study, what happens is that you may use multiple cases. You may use case A, case B, case C, case D, like that. You may use 6, 7 cases. And then based on those 7 cases, you are saying that what I'm saying is true. Or on using that, then you can frame a hypothesis. You're using cases as a means of literature review. You have read 7, 8 cases, 10 cases, 15 cases, and then because all of those cases are trying to say the same thing, then based on that you are framing a hypothesis and you are generalizing, and then you are actually trying to prove or disapprove the hypothesis. So generalization in research methodology is very critical. So you use various ways. You could use interviews to gather data, as Mona pointed out, inductive reasoning, and then you could use various approaches, and one approach is case studies. So you may use multiple cases and multiple scenarios then, and then based on that, you would say that, okay, based on all these cases, because all of them are trying to say the same thing, then we are generalizing based on that, right? So generalization is one major, objective, or one major thing which is actually achieved by using the case study method. So do remember this point, right? So on this slide, we have covered various important things. The first thing is we define the term case, and we understood what it is. I also told you that cases explore questions of how and why. They do not explore questions of how much. Then I also told you that case is a situation. The situation could be real or it could be hypothetical. Mostly it is real. And then I told you that case is supported by facts, information, data, which is all there as a part of the exhibits of the case study. And then I spoke about the concept of generalization and research methodology, which you can use cases to do that. I hope everybody is listening to me. Can I get some response? Right, from people? Yes or no? Are you all listening to me or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good. See, it feels good, no? It feels good when we are teaching in the class. We ask our students, isn't it? That are you all listening to me? So we feel good that there is somebody there on the opposite side. Otherwise, in the virtual world, life has become so difficult. You really don't know whether the other side people are listening to you also, or you're speaking to yourself. Right? So in the class, also do this. Ask the students. Great. So this is what is the case. Let's go ahead. Good. Thank you for your response, all of you. Let's go ahead. Okay. Now this. So generally, whenever you try to look at a case, what is the format of a case, right? So the format of a case is, this is generally the format of any case study. A case will always have something called as an opening paragraph, where, they will try to introduce to you the situation of that case. Then it will have some background information. It can talk about the culture. In your case, it can talk about the industry, or it can talk of the scenario because of which that whole thing has happened, because of which the matters reach the court. So it'll talk about the background information. It could relate to industry, it could relate to organization, it could relate to behavior, products, history, competition, can be financial information also. Then slowly, when you are talking of cases, then your subject starts appearing. So in business management, we have subjects like marketing, finance, law, commercial law, business law, all these laws, etc. All that information slowly, or sometimes the subjects may all be integrated. See, the beauty of case studies. A case study, when you look at any case study, it will have so many subjects all together. You will never have something called as only a law case, or you would never have something only called as a management case, or you would not have anything. As I told you, all these subjects are linked. You tell me, if you're practitioners of law, if you're practitioners of business law, if you don't understand business management, how are you going to practice business law? If you don't know how to apply things to businesses, how are you going to? If you're talking of civil procedures and civil laws, you will agree with me that understanding society, understanding social norms, group behavior, sociology is so important. If you're talking of criminal law, then you will agree with me that understanding, the crime, why the crime was committed, and what is the background, and the psychology of the person who has committed the crime is so important, right? And therefore, all these things are actually all interconnected in case studies. And then, sometimes you may have to, there's a certain problem which you may have to solve, or there is a certain decision which has to be taken based on that case study. There are alternatives also which may be available. All these alternative solutions may actually be a part of the case study. And then you will have to pick up the right alternative. And then, at the end, there'll be a conclusion wherein there will also be some limitations, there'll be some constraints based on that. So any case study will have all these things. If you look at any case study from any of the fields, they will have all these parts of information. The point is, all this is, it's not given like, okay, this part is introduction and this part is background information and this part is a specific functional area. All these things are together. So when you're reading the case study, because now I have given you the format, you should be in a position to pick up that what is background information and what is the subject and what is the conclusion, right? So this is generally the format of a case study. Do remember this. Okay. And, whenever you are talking of, generally when you talk of the approaches through which you handle case studies, mainly you talk of two approaches. One is, some cases are actually problem solving, cases which are based on problems, where you have to go ahead and you have to actually solve a problem, where there is a problem to be solved or a decision to be taken. But there are some case studies which are not problem case studies, or where there is no specific situation, but these case studies are more conceptual, wherein by using the case studies, you have to develop theory. You have to use the case studies and you have to develop theory based on those case studies, right? So again, case studies are bifurcated into two. One set of case studies which talk of problems and decisions to be taken based on what is there in the case study. The second set of case studies talk about cases where there is no problem or no decision, but where you actually have to build theory, where there is a certain new area. Like for example, in your case, you will agree with me that cyber law, cyber law, you will agree that cyber law was something which was not heard of a long back, but something which is now really coming up. So if you want to use case studies and then you want to develop some new theory in the area of cyber law or why cyber crimes are committed, and you're trying to explore that, a new field, then you can use case studies as a method of developing theory, right? That is where also case studies, so any new or innovative areas, you can use case studies. Great. Okay, let's go ahead. Now this, as I told you, this is very, very important. Just have a look at this and I'll explain this in detail to you. Very important statement. Very, very, as I told you, if you want to read case study research, please read Yin and Yin. 1994, a lot of research and literature is published on case study as a method of research. So, when so the question that we were trying to answer is when you should use case studies for research. It says very clearly that when you want to answer a how question or when you want to answer a why question, that is when you use a case study. And you're talking about a contemporary set of events. That means you're trying to look into the future. You're not talking about historical information, but you're trying to predict that what is going to happen. When you're trying to look at future, then that is when you use a case study. And the next sentence is very important, where the investigator has little or no control. Now, let me tell you, have you heard of experiments? Have you heard of social experiments as a method of research? Anybody has used experiments as a method of research? Social experiments? Anybody has any idea about experiments as a method of research? You will agree with me that one way of doing research is using experiments. And whenever you talk of understanding society or social norms or social behaviors, and you will agree with me that there is a whole set of law which governs society. When you're trying to understand that, there is something called as social experiments. Now, when should you use experiments and when you should use case studies? You should use experiments when you can control the behavior of the person, where you have control over the event. Like I'm trying to understand, as I told you, I'm trying to understand the behavior of a criminal, that why this crime was committed. Now, when I'm trying to understand the behavior of the criminal, can I manipulate the behavior of the criminal? Can I manipulate the behavior of the criminal? The answer is no. I'm not trying to manipulate the behavior and then trying to see that the crime has been committed. There is a certain behavior which has been displayed at that time. I'm trying to understand why did he display this behavior. I'm not trying to manipulate the behavior. But when you're trying to, manipulate things and manipulate phenomenon and then trying to understand things, then you use experiments. Then you don't use case studies, because in case studies there is no manipulation. In case study there is a given situation and you have to understand the situation as it is and then try to answer the why behind the situation or the how behind the situation, period. You're not doing any manipulation, or you do not have any control over the events. The event has occurred, you don't have any control over that. You are just an investigator, you are an observer, and you're trying to understand the event and then trying to interpret the event on that from that perspective. That is where a case study comes in. So there's a clear-cut difference between case study and an experiment. Do remember this one. People, are y'all there? Good afternoon. Are y'all sleeping? Awake? What is happening? I don't know. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
So, but by any chance, while studying the case study, can somebody have any control on that, sir? It says, the definition says has little control, but the case study would have already been happened, and then you are reading about it. So is there any sort of control that can be there?
So, the whole point is that you would hardly have any control. It says very clearly you would have little or no control. You would have little or no control practically, because, that is a situation that has occurred. The crime has been committed. Now you're trying to understand why the crime was committed. You are not trying to manipulate the crime, or you're not trying to control the crime. It is something which has occurred and you're just trying to investigate that. So, and therefore in case studies, the control factor over the event is missing. Whereas in experiments, when you're doing social experiments, then you will actually manipulate and you will have a lot of control, because then you are actually doing that in order to draw an inference from that. So I may, take 6 people and then have a social experiment with that, and then make them behave in that particular way in order to understand that what is happening. So I have a lot of control over events in experiments, whereas in cases, when I'm using cases, the control over events doesn't exist. Am I making myself clear? Guys, I'm going into hardcore research methodology. I hope you all are with me.
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah, sir. Yeah. Okay. So just one clarity, you refer to this research book by Kin. Are you referring to Robert Kin, sir?
No, this is Yin, Y-I-N. See, I quoted it, Yin, 1994.
Okay.
It's Yin and Yin.
Yin and Yin. Okay.
A lot of research and literature is available by Yin and Yin specifically on using case studies as a tool for research.
So I have a book which is the case study research method by Robert K. Yin. So
okay.
I'm not sure whether you're referring to the same person.
Right. So which is the year? Does it read 1994?
This is the 6th edition, sir. I'll have to go back and see.
Okay. So just do some study on that, sir, because this was actually done in the year 1994. Now, after that, if there have been further advancements to that, I don't know. But the original research is by Yin and Yin.
Right. Right, so, sir. Thank you.
And I'll be also referring a very good research paper for you all at the end. So that's a surprise.
I think the first edition of this book was written in 1984, sir. So I think it might be the same book you're referring to.
Yes, and then it progressed. So please do read that. I think that is going to help a lot if you're going to use the case study.
Thank you.
Okay. So this is the when. Let's go ahead. Now read this. Just have a read.
Sorry to interrupt. Dr. Salim, can you make it full screen so that it can be better visible?
Full frame?
Yeah.
Okay. So is it not full frame? Is the question. Yes. Is it now better?
Fonts need to be increased, sir.
Fonts?
Yes, sir.
That is a little difficult for me to do now because I'm parallelly using it, but I will be discussing each point, so don't worry.
Okay. Okay.
Right, great. So, so now we are trying to answer the question is that when to use case studies. As I told you that, whenever you're trying to answer the questions of why and how, that is where you use case studies. That's where you actually need a more detailed investigation into things. But then whenever you want to answer questions like who or where or how many or how much or the extent of something, then you use a method called as sampling. Then you use a method called as sampling, or you may use surveys, or you may use records or documentation, right? If you're trying to answer these research questions, who, where, how much, how many, or extent, then you don't use case studies. Also, case studies, as I told you, is used when you are trying to explore new research areas. As I told you that, let's say if you want to do some research in the area of cyber law, right, or some cyber crimes and something you're trying to investigate, all that, and where existing theory is not available. Doesn't not, you will agree with me that there's not much of theory available on cyber law and cyber crimes, right? So you are actually using case studies now to develop more theory. So that is where also case study method becomes very useful. The next point, which I told you already, is that you will use case studies when you cannot manipulate things, or where you have little or no control over events, right? And also when there are multiple things, like there are several actors, or there are several things which are happening parallelly. That is when also you will try to use case studies. The focus is more on future. Whenever you're using case studies, the focus is more on future. You're not trying to. It is not more related to history, but it's more trying to relate it to what is going to happen. Now, the next question, which we try to talk about is that whenever you're using case studies, let me just come to this mode because I'm a little bit more comfortable with this. Right. So whenever you use case studies, the other thing is that what about the data? Where is the data? Data collection is a very important part of research methodology. So where is the data going to come from? So whenever you're using case studies, it's not that the data all has to be qualitative. There could be data which could come from quantitative sources also. So let's say you're using some time series, or you're gathering some data which is numerical based. So that's quantitative data. So, but you could also use interviews. In law, the most two very good data collection methods of which, can anybody tell me that which are the best or most effective data collection methods in law? There are multiple data collection methods. You all will agree with me that there are many data collection methods, right? In law, which you think are the most effective? Anybody?
So questionnaires.
Questionnaires. Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Interviews.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, generally, yes. So generally in law, as per my opinion, whatever research I've done in this area, observations and interviews are two of the best methods to collect data. Questionnaires, yes, to a certain extent, but questionnaires will go more towards management. Questionnaires will go more towards management when you're doing studies relating to management, marketing specifically. That's used with design questionnaires. But whenever you talk of doing research in law, then observations and interviews. And within this also, when you talk of interviews, within interviews also there are various methods of interviewing. There is something which is called as a structured interview. There is something which is called as an unstructured interview. In law, we generally prefer interviews which are unstructured. And these interviews and the questions that you ask are not close-ended questions. Like, I would not ask questions where I get an answer only yes or no. Whenever I'm using case studies and I'm trying to apply it to law, legal research, then I will use questions which are open-ended, where I will try to get answers to why is that person trying to say that? Why is that person giving me this answer? I will let him speak. I will interview the person and let him speak, open-ended. Let him speak. I'll make my own notes. When the person is speaking, I'll make my own notes. I give full freedom to the person to speak. I don't restrict my discussion only to a yes or no. This is very critical. So don't use structured interviews, structured where you get only yes or no. Keep it open-ended and keep it informal. Keep it free flow. Let the information come in and then use that information and then take a decision that what exactly you want to use, what part of information is relevant to what you're trying to do a research on, what part of the information is not relevant, what is not relevant you can reject, what is relevant you can use. So remember this point, right? And when you compare case studies with surveys, there's a clear difference between a survey and a case study. In survey, the number of units studied is very large. Whenever you're doing a survey, you will agree with me, many of you would have done your PhD by using survey. You will agree with me that the sample size has to be pretty large. But when you're using case studies, you don't talk of using 50 case studies. You would use 5 case studies, max you'd use 10 case studies, right? So the sample size in a case study is very less, right? So that is how a case study is different from a survey, and a case study is definitely different from an experiment. I told you that an experiment is done with an objective of controlling behavior, or you're trying to manipulate the behavior, you have control over the events. Whereas in a case study, you don't have control over the events. Thing has already occurred. You're just trying to investigate and answer the why. So this slide is very critical in my opinion, because this slide tries to tell you that when you should be using the case study method and when you should not be using the case study method. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. People are there?
Yeah.
It's
so much to take. We are trying to absorb and make most of it. And I'm jotting down points literally.
Right. That's good. Generally, my sessions are very, very informative. They're full of information. So I know it's all, take it a little slowly, and I'll be sharing this PPT with you. So don't worry. I'll give this to Dr. Azim and then he'll share that with you all. That's not a concern, but try and understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah, that's very critical. Good, but good. I'm happy that you found it informative. Great then. So this is, so by now we have answered a very critical question. The question that we have answered is when we should be using case studies. Right? Now we have answered that. Now let's go into how we should be using case studies. Let's go ahead. Now read this. Just have a read. So now, generally, as we further try to understand the case study method of research, you need to understand this is a qualitative method of research. This is not a quantitative method. This is a qualitative method of research. Doesn't mean you can't use quantitative data. Data collection and method are different. Data collection and method are two different things. Here we are talking of what is the method. Is it a quantitative method? It's a qualitative method. We are trying to answer how and why. So it's qualitative. We are not trying to answer the question how much, and therefore it's not quantitative. That is the first thing you need to understand. And then for what kind of researches can you use that? Now you will agree with me that research methodology further classifies researches into various categories. And there is something which is called as an exploratory research. There is something which is called as a descriptive research. There is something which is called as an explanatory research. So whenever you are trying to use exploratory, or whenever you're trying to use explanatory, so exploratory means, as I told you, development of new theory. Exploratory, you're exploring something, you're trying to develop based on that. Or explanatory, you're trying to explain something. You're trying to explain something, right? Or descriptive, when you're trying to describe something. So whenever you're trying to explore, develop new theory, or whenever you're trying to explain the context or the phenomenon because of which behind this legal judgment, behind this case, what is the phenomenon or what is the context? You're trying to explain that, or you're trying to describe the judgment, and you're trying to then discern or take decisions based on that description of your understanding of what that judgment is trying to say, the legality is trying to say. That is when you use case studies. So all kind of exploratory, explanatory, or descriptive research designs will use case studies. And then for you, for lawyers, then I thought I'll highlight something in red. So for you, how the law has been understood, how and why it was applied, or how and why it was misapplied. See, you will agree with me that in law, I'm not a professor of law, I'm a professor of finance, but I've studied management, so I've studied everything. So whenever we are trying to understand and explain law, we look at two things. One is we try to see cases of compliance with law, and we also try to study cases where people have not complied with it. How did people break this law? Like taxation. Taxation. How did I escape the tax law? How did I escape the Income Tax Act 1961 and save tax? So I'm trying to also look at how I'm finding loopholes in the law and then taking advantage of those loopholes. So I'm looking at the application, and I'm also looking at the misapplication. So whenever you are trying to then look at these kind of phenomena, trying to understand the law, the judgment, how and why it was applied, how and why. See again, how and why it was applied, or how and why it was misapplied. That is where this comes in, case study comes in. Right? And there is one more very critical thing which I had spoken about earlier also when I had done similar FDPs all across universities. So I don't know whether you have ever in research methodology, have you heard of a term called as triangulation? In research methodology, have you ever come across the term called as triangulation? Anybody? Triangulation. Professors, where are you all? Triangulation? Okay, have you heard? Yeah, yes, Mayuri ji. Boliye, please. Yes, Dr. Mayuri.
Yes, sir. Sir, this is sorry.
Okay, in qualitative research, yes.
Okay.
Your voice is not audible. Can you type in the comment box?
Now it's okay, sir.
Yes, it is better now. Please go ahead.
This is refer to use of multiple methods of research.
Okay.
The middle one is the end user search.
Okay. I'm not in a position to, but I got two answers, qualitative. Okay, I'll tell you. See, one very important thing that we all use different evidence. Yeah, this is excellent, Nusrat. This exactly is the question, using different evidences to support your research. This is triangulation. So triangulation means you are using various ways to arrive at the same conclusion. You will agree with me that when you talk of data, there are generally two sets of data, primary data and secondary data. So primary data is your interviews, your questionnaires, your observations. Secondary data comes from your published literature, books, periodicals, journals. In your case, the judgments of the court, the judgments passed by the court are the secondary data. You yourself are sitting in the court and you're observing how the lawyers are fighting against each other, how they're arguing. That's your observation. That's primary. So you're using both primary and secondary data in order to arrive at the same conclusion. Now just tell me, isn't it so beautiful that primary data, you use primary data and you use secondary data and both of them are telling you the same thing? Don't you agree with me that your research is much more correct? Because two different sets of data you're using and you're arriving at the same conclusion. You're arriving at the same conclusion. This is called as triangulation. So triangulation means you use different evidences, different data sets, different methodologies, and you try to arrive at the same conclusion. Now, when you're using the case study method, I'll answer that. Swarnendu, I'll answer that. So when you're using the case study method, then you are using triangulation because when you're doing cases, you have gathered a lot of your data from primary sources. That's through observations, interviews, and questionnaires. And you've also looked at a lot of judgments and cases and records and documents. So you're also using secondary data. And you're using both the data sets. And if both of them are trying to arrive at the same thing, your hypothesis is being proved, then triangulation has been achieved. And this is the best way. This is also called as corroboration. In research methodology, we also call this as corroboration. Right? So triangulation should be achieved by using case studies. By only in case studies, in any form of any research design that you follow, if you can achieve triangulation or corroboration, then that is very much advantageous. So remember this point, very important point. Now, one more major thing that you should do when you're using case studies is you should also create something which is called as a chain of evidence. Chain of evidence. One event leading to the other event, leading to the third event. So you've established a chain. I looked at 20 judgments and I was trying to pick up the common thread across those judgments. And I was then trying to collect evidence around that, and I built a chain of evidence. I built a sequence of evidence. So that sequence of evidence, or if you're building a chain of evidence, then your research is much more powerful and it is much more correct. And when you try to publish papers in good journals, if you have a strong chain of evidence and if you follow triangulation, then the chances of acceptance of your paper are very high. I have presented a lot of papers, especially at conferences of IIMs. And I tell you that if you go through triangulation and you go through this corroborative approach and you develop evidences, chain of evidences, then your acceptance is much more, the rate of acceptance is much more higher. So do look at these 2 points, which are very important, right? Let's go ahead. So then I told you observations, legal guidelines, press articles can be useful. Legal case researchers should ideally rely a lot on interviews. I feel interviews and observations are two very critical methods if you are talking of law. And the meaning that interview participants give to their experiences. That you also interview judges and you interview lawyers, you interview different lawyers, and you try to understand that what are their different perspectives, what are their experiences with the legal systems, and what are their different perspectives, and every lawyer may have a different perspective. Judgment is passed by the judge, but the way the lawyer interprets it, perspectives may be different, right? And then you try to understand that what could be the phenomenon, what could be the socio-economic forces behind all these legal processes and legal institutions, right? So then you try to discover or uncover that by using case studies. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Are people there? Or you have gone to sleep with all my...
Good afternoon, sir. We are there and you're actually explaining very clearly to us.
Okay.
And we're enjoying.
Good. I'm giving you very, very heavy research methodology stuff, so you should not go to sleep.
No, this is very interesting, sir.
Okay, great. Good. So this, this is a very, very critical thing that you all have to kind of remember. So do remember, so what are the major things I covered in this slide? Qualitative, exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, triangulation, chain of evidence, right? And I explained to you each of these and the importance of that, right? Great. And as a researcher, obviously you are an observer. You are not doing an experiment, so you don't have any control. As I just answered one question, this is not an experiment. You are just an observer. You're just an analyzer. You don't have the power to control the event, right? So it is also not an experiment. Remember this. Great, let's go ahead. So now, as we go ahead, this is very important. Please have a read of this. This is very, very critical. Okay. This is very critical. Please read. Everybody just take 2 minutes and read. I have about 20 minutes remaining and I think I'll finish. Okay. So now, further as we go into this method of case study as a research tool, it is very important for you when you're using case studies to define the unit of analysis. Is your unit of analysis a person? Are you trying to research the person? Or are you trying to research the group? Or are you trying to research a location? Or are you trying to research an organization? Or are you trying to research an event? So, it is very important for you to define this. Because when you're using case studies, you will have a lot of information. And the first thing you will have to define is that your research pertains to what? What are you analyzing? Is it the person, his behavior? Or is it the group behavior? Is it a family-related problem? Or is it an individual problem? It's a family-related thing or it's a society-related thing? Then your unit of analysis is group. If it is an individual related thing, then the unit of analysis is the person. Or is it with respect to the location? You will agree with me that a lot of legal judgments are your legal judgments that are passed are also influenced by the culture of the country where it is passed. Culture also has an influence on law. You agree or not? What is the culture in US and what is the culture in India? It's not the same. So your judgments which may have been passed there and your judgments which are being passed here are also influenced by the culture of the country where those judgments have been passed. And therefore, is your unit of, and so are you doing some cross-section study where you're trying to explore the legal system and the judgments with the influence of culture on the legal system in US vis-a-vis India? So then your unit of analysis should be location. Your unit of analysis should be location, because then US is a location, India is a location. So what you're analyzing are two different locations and then trying to do the study accordingly. Or is your research relating to business or organization, organizational culture, organizational conflict, labor problems? So then your unit of analysis becomes the organization, becomes the company. You will agree with me that a lot of the judgments and the conflicts pertain in the organization. Employee related problems, labor related problems, conflicts go to the court of law. Trade unions, Trade Union Act, right? Employee protection related laws, employee grievance related issues. So all these pertain to organizations. So then is your unit of analysis an organization? Or is your unit of analysis an event? That some event has occurred. Some event has occurred and you're trying to analyze that event. Like in our case right now, a major event which has occurred is the pandemic. A major event which has occurred is the pandemic. COVID is an event. COVID is an event. So are you doing your study, or is your law or some legal study relating to the presence of COVID, which is an event? And then you're trying to interpret with reference to the event. So then your unit of analysis becomes COVID. Hello? Hello? Are you all there?
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, okay, right, great. So it is very important for you. Don't get hypnotized. It is very important for you to identify the unit of analysis. And this is the base of the case study. And I would say that the most important thing when you're doing research using case studies is to identify the correct unit of analysis. Just imagine that you are trying to research a person and your unit of analysis is group. Then how is it possible? You're trying to research something related to organization and you have chosen unit of analysis as event. Then how is the case study? The whole case study will be wrong. The whole method will fail. Right? So be mindful of this. I think this slide of mine is the most important amongst all the slides. Right? So be careful of this. Select. So identify. So first thing is identify what are your research questions. Why are you doing this research? Based on that, identify the unit of analysis. Based on that, decide the case studies. Decide the number of case studies. Decide the data collection methods. Follow triangulation. Follow corroboration. Create a chain of evidence. Write case reports. And then summarize. Then prove or disapprove your hypothesis. Right? But that is the sequence in which you're supposed to proceed when you're using this method. Most important, the heart of this method is defining the correct unit of analysis. Okay, great. I hope you people are there. I hope you people are understanding. I'm trying my best to make you understand.
I have one question, sir.
I'll answer all your questions, dear. I'm almost at the end. Let me just finish and then I'll take all your questions altogether. Just give me 1 minute. Right, this is something free. I don't know whether it's very clearly visible because I took this image from somewhere and put it here. But I'll tell you that, within this also cases can be, further subdivided into holistic. I don't know whether there's a marker somewhere here which I can use on this thing. Is marker facility available on this Google Meet? Because on Teams we used to use marker. Okay, I don't know whether it's available here. There is something which is called as holistic. If you see the word holistic is written here. And there is something which is called as embedded. Case studies also classified into holistic and embedded. So holistic is when you use only one case. One single case, and you're using that case to draw an inference, right? Or you're using multiple cases, but in all of those cases, the unit of analysis is one. only same unit of analysis. Whereas if you're using embedded method, then in embedded method, your unit of analysis, that you can use more than one unit of analysis. That I'm doing the research with respect to the person and the organization, both. Or I'm doing the research using organization and event, both. So you're trying to study an event, you're trying to study an organization in times of COVID. So the event is COVID. Event is COVID. In that event COVID, you're trying to study an organization. Right? So now there are two units of analysis. So whenever you're using two units of analysis, then it becomes something which is called as an embedded case study. So case study designs, research designs could be holistic, where you use only one case study, single, or only one unit of analysis, multiple case studies, but only one unit of analysis. Or embedded, where you use multiple units of analysis, either in one case study or in multiple case studies. So holistic and embedded. More complex is embedded, because in embedded there are multiple units of analysis, multiple cases. So to that extent, reaching conclusions becomes, you'd have to do an extensive literature review and study the whole thing much more in detail. So holistic and embedded, do remember these two also whenever you're using case studies, right? Okay, let's go ahead. Now, these are some stages which I already spoke about, and you can just quickly read that. These are the stages of doing research using case study method. Have a look, please. As I told you, first decide your research questions, decide whether case study method is appropriate. Remember, I just told you that you need to answer the questions how and why. Don't use case study for what. Don't use case study for where. Don't use case study for how much. And Ashish, to develop a research proposal for PhD is something not a part of my talk today. But someday if Dr. Azim invites me again, I'll come to your university. I would like to come to your university, and there I'll do this. I'll do this session for you all, and we can always talk about that. But it's beyond the scope of my topic today. But I'll speak to you maybe. So whenever you are talking of a case study, determine the research questions, very critical. Decide if case study is appropriate. I told you why and how. Remember these two words, right? How many cases? Should it be holistic or embedded? How many cases are you going to use? One case or multiple cases? One unit of analysis or multiple units of analysis, right? So either it can methodology can be holistic or it can be embedded. Select the cases, decide the data collection methods, whether you're going to use, I told you, observations, interviews. In law, observations and interviews, I think, are the two best methods of collecting data. And interviews also, I told you, mostly unstructured interviews. Open-ended interviews. Don't keep it close-ended. We need a lot of information if you have to develop cases, right? Prepare to collect the data. You may have to go in the field also to collect. You may have to interview people, no? So you'll have to go to the field. You may have to meet judges. You may have to meet lawyers. You may have to prepare questionnaires, discuss with them, understand their perspectives, understand the judgments. One is secondary. Understand the judgments on your own. Second is interpret them. Ask people to interpret them for you, right? Then evaluate and analyze the data, and then obviously write the report and present the findings, right? So these are generally the steps that you will follow whenever you're using case study as a method of research. Research questions, decide whether case study method is correct, then decide how many cases you need, then decide that what will be the data collection methods, then decide, collect the data, evaluate, analyze the data, remember triangulation, remember corroboration, collect the data from various sources, right? And evaluate and analyze the data, and then write the report and present the findings. And these steps generally are linear. They are one after the other, but they could always be iterative. So in research, there is something called as iteration, right? So it may not necessarily always follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It could be 1, then 3, then 4. So there could be how many decide. So Nusrat, I'll answer all your questions at the end. So reserve that for me. So, these are generally the stages that you follow when you use the case study method. So remember this. Great then, yeah, so we're almost there now. This is how I would put it. Again, Yin, I told you the research done by Yin. So Yin case study method, you can use page 50, talks about the description of how the method is to be used. Right? So this is the flow chart. Identify the evaluation problem, develop theory, develop design, select the cases, use the data collection methods. You can use multiple cases. Generally, I would, Nusrat just asked me, I would say that, I would say max 10 cases, not beyond that. Don't use a lot of, see, because if you try using 50 and 60 cases, then what you're doing is almost survey. Right? You're not doing survey, you're using case study. So if you have to do a survey, then do a survey, then don't use case study. Or you could use case study and survey both. You could use case study and survey both. One tries to tell you something, other maybe tries to tell you the same thing. Then again, what you're doing is triangulation. Right? So it's possible. But don't make case study a survey and don't make survey a case study. Don't make experiment a case study and don't make case study an experiment, because these are different methods and they are answering different research questions. That's why I started with how, why, what, where, and how much. Right? All of them have different purpose. Okay? And then write the case reports and draw case conclusions. Sometimes you have to develop theory. I told you you can have conceptual cases where you may have to develop theory by using those cases. So theory and policy implications. In your case, there could be a lot of legal problems or societal issues because of which there can be some policy implications. Your research, you will agree with me that research in law can be a lot policy-based, policy research, public policy. Because there could be so many societal issues which you're trying to actually do research on, right? And then you're trying to develop policy implications based on your research. Right? And write cross-case reports. And so this is the flow, or these are the steps when you are actually following the case study method. You can again read Yin, so Yin and all his additions. Over there has done a lot of work on that. Great, and as we are now almost ending, and I always finish my talk in time, there are always some constraints. Remember, there can be some constraints in selection of cases. There can be some constraints in selection of cases, and one is, sometimes cases may not be accessible. Sometimes you may not have the necessary resources. Money can be a constraint. Time can be a constraint. See, case study method actually requires a lot of time because it's very qualitative based. It's not like numbers. So if you're doing my PhD is in economics. My PhD is in economics. So my whole study is quantitative. So you take numbers and then you start playing with the numbers. But case study is not like that. Case study requires a lot of theoretical background and reading, right? It takes a lot of time. So there is always a problem of time. There's a problem of resources. You may not have the money to access all that. You may not have the money to, conduct interviews and all that. And cases may not be available to you. They may not be accessible to you. Judgments may not be available to you. Judges may refuse to speak to you. Lawyers may refuse to speak to you. So all these problems are always there. And therefore, these would be the constraints, right? This would be the problems. And last but not the least, something which I think is very, very important. Have a read on this. I'll explain this. And this is my last slide, so bear with me on this. Okay, and just read this. Very critical. Very, very important. Oh. Just take 2 minutes and read. Now, whenever you're doing, and you all have studied research methodology, so you would be knowing the meaning of these words, but I will not ask you. But, whenever you're doing research, and if your research has to be correct, it needs to satisfy all these 4 things. One is construct validity. The other is internal validity. Third is external validity. And fourth is reliability. And if all the four are satisfied, then what you have done makes sense. If either of them are not satisfied, then your research is wrong. So what is constructive validity? Construct validity, it actually refers to objectivity versus subjectivity. How much is your research objective versus subjective? Now, if you're using case study, cases is very subjective. Cases is very subjective, right? So what you can do, you can use multiple sources of evidence. I told you triangulation. And I told you, establish a chain of evidence. If you establish a chain of evidence and you do triangulation, and whenever you're writing those cases, your case reports, you get them reviewed by people. The people who you have interviewed, tell them only to review them. Tell them only to review. Tell them only to review when they themselves are reviewing. They have been interviewed and they are reviewing. Then trust me, it will be so nice. Right? So construct validity is critical. So construct validity. You can establish a chain of evidence, use triangulation, and get your case drafts reviewed by informants, right? People who you have interviewed. Internal validity. How correct are the inferences you have made in the case study? How correct are the inferences you have made in the case study? You can do explanation building and you can address rival explanations. Give your case draft to people. Let them give you different explanations. Match your explanation with their explanation and then try to address their explanations. When you will do that, you will get a lot of insights into what you yourself have written. And you will be in a position to draw more correct inferences. And when you draw more correct inferences, your research to that extent becomes much more correct. Right? That's internal validity. External validity. We talk of something called as generalization. Use replication through multiple cases. I told you generally use multiple cases. And then if all the cases are trying to tell you the same thing, the word generalization, I told you, if you can generalize out of these 10, 15 cases that you have read, then what you've done is externally valid. It is true because everything is trying to say the same thing. Right? So that's called as external validity and reliability. What you have done should not have biases. What you have done should not have errors. Now, again, if you develop a chain of evidence and you develop a case database, then to larger extent, what you have done will be error-free and will be bias-free. If it is error-free and if it is bias-free, then what you have done is reliable and it can be trusted. So any research, whether it be case study or whatever you're doing, needs to fulfill these parameters. Construct validity, external validity, internal validity, and reliability. Then only what you have done is correct. Whether it be law, management, commerce, anything, this applies to everything. Clear? Okay. So I think, okay. And I'm almost there. And I'm now giving you a very good gift. If you are really interested in reading case research in law, you should read this article. You should read this paper, Making the Case for Case Studies in Empirical Legal Research, by, I can't pronounce his name very correctly, Ikaterny Argyrov. And the journal is Utrecht Law Review. I think all the people, all of you who are thinking of using case studies as a method of research should read this paper. I got this paper just 2 days before and I was just trying to read, though I'm not a lawyer, but it's so interesting. It is so interesting, right? So please read this. It is a must read for you. Great then, so thank you very much, and I'm through with my presentation. And I'm sure you enjoyed and you benefited, all of you. Yes, that's true, Nusrat. Yeah. So I end my talk over there, and thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all benefited. I gave you a lot of technical terms today. Remember all these terms; they're going to be very useful to you as researchers. We all are teachers, we all are professors, we are researchers. So whichever field we may belong to, all these things apply to all of us, right? Thank you and take care. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Tariq and Dr. Azim.
Thank you, sir. Would you like to take one or two questions?
Yes, please.
So we are done with the,
I will take questions. I will take.
Yeah, we can spend next 5 minutes.
Yes.
So yes. Can you ask the question? I now open the floor.
Good afternoon, sir. So I had written this question in the chat box. What will be the difference then between mixed method research and triangulation?
So the term triangulation is generally used more for data. That when you are trying to collect data from various sources, and then you are trying to say that, okay, based on my primary data and my secondary data, I'm trying to arrive at the same conclusion. A mixed research method is a more broader term, where you're using various research methods or methodologies. Like you may use a case method, you may use a survey, you may use an experiment, and then using various methods to say that. So the word triangulation actually is more related to the data collection methods rather than the entire research methods as a whole.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
My specialization is aerospace laws and policy. So while we are trying to draft the latest Commercial and Privatization Act for India in the domain of aerospace, how will case studies help me formulate new theories? Can you help me here?
Yeah, so you in fact should use a lot of case studies. So I think what you can do, Dr. Purvi, is you can start interviewing people. You start interviewing people who are working in this particular domain. Prepare open-ended, unstructured interviews. Start meeting people who are working in this area. Try to gather the information. First, frame your research questions, that what exactly you're trying to do. What theory you're trying to develop theory. So what part of theory or which particular area within that you're trying to focus on, right? And then according to that, prepare your interviews, which are unstructured, open-ended. Go and meet people, interact with them, and start gathering information from there. One. Second is, if there are no books or there is no developed theory in this, but there would be some research reports or there will be some articles or some published literature, which would be your secondary data. So you can start reading that also and try gathering data from that. Once you've done all that, once you've triangulated, then start writing your own case report based on that. And then when you've written your case report, try to see that is some new theory coming out, which is already not published or which is not there, right? So if that new theory is where, then you can actually go into writing books and probably add a book chapter or probably write a book in that particular area. So your research would not be analytical, wherein you're not solving problems or taking decisions, but based on this, you are developing theory and probably contributing to a book chapter or some kind of a publication in terms of the theory development. That is the way I would have gone if I would have been in your place, and if there's something totally new.
Understood.
Dr. Purvi?
Understood. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. This is helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. Now we have come to the last point of our session, and I would just allow one more question if anybody would like to ask.
Yes, go on.
Else we can.
Sir, my name is Zikra Jabin. I want to ask sir, if I am doing research on a product, then what is the difference between case study and a customer review?
Oh, so there's a huge difference between case study and case study is used to analyze customer behavior. Customer behavior is what you're observing. How are you analyzing that customer behavior is by writing or reading case studies. So case study is a method. Case study is a method which is used to analyze customer behavior or investor behavior or criminal behavior. So case study is a methodology. Customer behavior is what you are analyzing. The methodology you're using to analyze is case study. So don't confuse method with the unit. So, unit of analysis in your case is the person. The unit of analysis in your case is the person, and the person in your case is the customer. So you're trying to understand the customer behavior and you're writing the case study around that, the unit of analysis. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say? So one is the method.
Yes, sir. Yes, I understood.
Other is what you are analyzing, the unit of analysis.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for clarifying my doubt.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a
so
small
much.
question for this. Sir, I have a small question. The ethical behavior is method.
Your voice is breaking.
Mr. Prince, we are not able to hear you.
I mean, very remote in Tamil Nadu right now. Signal is very weak. Can you hear me?
I'm extremely sorry, Mr. Prince, but you are not audible. Your voice is breaking too much.
Thank you.
Mr. Prince, I will request you to write your question in the chat box if possible.
I will try to write.
Can you write quickly? Yes.
Impact of ethical research and research methodology. So ethical practices need to be followed in everything, whether it be research methodology or anything. There is no doubt on that. So any kind of research that you do needs to follow rules wherein you are not duplicating information, where information is realistic, and so that needs to be followed. So there is no further comment on that. Ethical practices have to be followed in everything that you're doing in life, including research.
Thank you, Dr. Salim Shamsher, for your very informative session, I would say. And the session has extended a little bit, but we have truly enjoyed your session. By what I was looking at, the interactions and the questions and the notes, etc., which came throughout the session. And I would say that whatever you have given today, it is the perfect example of interdisciplinary research between the law and management. And you are the person from finance. And this session was possibly one of the sessions which was very much essential, considering the fact that you rightly said that every subjects are linked. So law and management are also linked, and I was looking that all the participants have truly enjoyed your session. And in this very short span of time, sir, you have covered plethora of topic. You have covered all the aspects of case study methods. You have talked about the interaction between the law and management. You have talked about the various research methodologies, importance of data in the legal research. You have talked about the case study design, research design, stages in research, in the case study methods. Though I have been taking the notes, but truly, if I took the notes for the entire session, I know I could fill up some 2 or 3 pages. So thank you very much, sir. The session was truly informative, and all of us, we have enjoyed, and it was a very good learning session. And I would like to say thanks on behalf of School of Law, GDGU University, on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, sir, Professor Dr. Tabrez Ahmad. I would like to say thanks on behalf of the head School of Law, Dr. Azim Khan, Bahadur Khan Pathan. And with this word, sir, I would like to call upon to end this session. Dr. Azim.
Thank you, Dr. Ajit. Thank you so much, Professor Salim sir, taking out time and indeed giving a wonderful session today in the context of case study research. I'm sure participants, they have a lot of important queries I was observing, and they were enjoying indeed, and it was a truly interactive session for all of us and for participants as well. Truly we have enjoyed. Indeed, I am so much thankful to you taking out time, giving us time today for this session on behalf of entire School of Law and Galgotias University, on behalf of our management, Vice Chancellor sir, all faculty members, organizer, convener, and obviously on behalf of participants, I extend heartfelt gratitude to you. And thank you so much. And we will definitely host you, very short time in campus as well. Thank you so much.
I would love to come.